In a distant future, we see a spacecraft transport Hunter Gratzner, carrying 40 passengers to the Tangiers system. All the passengers are in cryogenic sleep, except for the notorious criminal Richard Riddick. One of the passengers is a Muslim priest named Imminent, who is accompanying 3 young pilgrims to New Mecca. Along with them are the wealthy merchant Pyrrhus and police officer William Johns, the escort of the violent criminal Richard Riddick. They are in deep space when the spacecraft is suddenly hit by a cloud of micrometeoroids, damaging parts of the ship and killing the captain. As a result, the ship's first officer, Owens, and pilot Carolyn Fry quickly take steps to handle the emergency. Fry immediately takes control of the spacecraft and makes rapid preparations to land on a nearby planet. She jettisons part of the spacecraft as it can no longer support heavy loads, but this isn't enough, so she plans to discard the passenger section to free up more weight. Realizing she is about to pull the switch, Owens becomes alarmed and rushes toward Fry to prevent her from taking such action. Realizing that she nearly killed several people, Fry feels guilty, but she has already lost control of the spacecraft, and there is nothing she can do to stop it from colliding with the planet's surface. Consequently, several passengers die, and only Pyrrhus, Johns, Riddick, Imminent, and the 3 young pilgrims survive the crash. Meanwhile, Fry finds Owens suffering from a lethal injury due to the impact of the spacecraft on the ground. She tries to save him by pulling the lever that nearly pierced his heart, but Owens tells her to stop and asks her to find medical equipment. Fry then commands the survivors to search for the Anastofian in Medlock, only to discover that nothing remains after the crash. She then orders the survivors to leave and leave her alone with Owens, who dies moments later. After a while, the survivors call Fry to see the outside, and she is amazed to discover that, in addition to the planet having breathable air, it is completely barren. All they can see ahead is just sand and rocks, with no signs of life. Next, Fry goes to check on Riddick, who is now contained inside the destroyed spacecraft and guarded by Johns. She discovers that Riddick has killed many people before and escaped from a maximum security prison, and that Johns intends to keep him locked up until they can find a place to stay. But as soon as Fry and Johns leave, Riddick frees himself from the chains and shackles on his hands and feet. He escapes from the spacecraft, and Johns becomes frustrated to find that Riddick has escaped. Therefore, Johns gathers the survivors to help him capture the criminal. But besides Riddick, who poses a potential threat to their safety, they also urgently need to find water, or else everyone will die there due to lack of water. They then split into 2 groups. One group sets out to find Riddick and water, while the other stays behind to bury the deceased passengers. As they wander, Johns shouts and orders them to stop moving after hearing strange noises nearby, fearing it could be Riddick. He then follows the sound and checks the perimeter. He looks through binoculars to see if Riddick is in the distance, but then he notices human movement coming toward him, so Johns quickly points his weapon at the person behind him, who turns out to be Fry. Johns apologizes and then tells her he hasn't found any sign of Riddick but has spotted some trees in the distance. Therefore, Johns and Fry head to the location with Imminent and the 3 young pilgrims, only to discover that it's a graveyard and that the trees are actually bones of large creatures. Still, they explore the area in hopes of finding Riddick or water. While searching, the young pilgrims find a robotic toy buried in the sand, and they call Fry over. Eventually, they find an abandoned geological research settlement, and Imminent discovers a water well and its source. Furthermore, Fry tracks a landing ship and informs the others about it, but upon entering, she discovers that the ship is not capable of flight. Back at the ship, Zeke accidentally fires his weapon at another survivor, thinking it was Riddick, and he buries the poor man in the dug-up ground, but abruptly stops when he finds a hole in the ground. When Zeke uses his flashlight to check what's inside, an unknown creature suddenly attacks him. Therefore, he fires at the creature, but its attack is brutal, and his body is severely injured. Next, Shatsa, who was waiting for Zeke, hears the gunfire and runs over to see if he is okay, but when she finally arrives, she notices that Zeke has already disappeared, and she sees Riddick standing nearby with a sharp bone. Afraid that Shatsa will blame him for the murder, Riddick tries to escape, but unexpectedly is captured by Johns. He falls to the ground, and Johns seizes the chance to overpower him, removing his sunglasses. In fact, Riddick cannot see in the sunlight due to the extreme sensitivity of his eyes, surgically enhanced to see in the dark. Thus, Johns easily captures him and takes him back to the ship. After a while, Fry visits Riddick and asks if he killed Zeke and buried him. At first, Riddick is reluctant to talk, but when Fry threatens to leave him in the ship to die, he reveals that it was a dangerous predatory creature that killed Zeke and dragged him into the hole. He then suggests they should dig deeper into the hole to find Zeke. After their conversation, Fry informs the survivors about her discussion with Riddick and orders them to help her as she goes into the hole. Once inside, Fry discovers several flying creatures hiding in the darkness and the remains of Zeke scattered in the cave. Terrified, she tries to escape through an opening, but the rope is already stretched. Because of this, Fry screams for help, and the survivors pull her up, away from the hostile creatures. Now that they realize Riddick's words were true, Johns goes back to the ship and makes a deal with him. He asks Riddick to help them escape the planet in exchange for removing the chains from his hands and feet. Riddick accepts the offer and soon joins the group to explore the planet. Later, the group returns to the ship with its power cell, with which they intend to activate the ship they found. Fry theorizes that the ship can still operate, so she plans to fix it, but it will be necessary to properly adapt the electrical part for it to work. After some time, Fry manages to get enough power for a test with the power cell but points out that they still need 5 more of them to launch the ship. Then, Shotza volunteers to find the power cells, and Johns agrees with the plan, reminding her to contact him if she has difficulties. While they talk, Johns realizes that Riddick has left his site, so he apologizes to Shotza and goes after him, finding him in the drilling room and sending him back to the ship. Back at the geological research settlement, the survivors drink to rest after a tiring day. However, Fry seems uncomfortable observing the facility where they are staying, confused about why the previous inhabitants abandoned the ship before leaving. Johns assumes that perhaps the ship was disposable. Riddick, however, disagrees with all their hypotheses, insisting that the locals must have been exterminated by the very creatures that took Zeke's life. Suddenly, Iman interrupts the conversation to report that one of his young pilgrims is missing. Upon hearing this, they rush to the drilling room only to find the young pilgrim dead and devoured by the predatory creatures. After the tragedy, they realize that the predatory creatures are sensitive to daylight and only hunt their prey in darkness. Therefore, John suggests that they should only stay out during the day to stay alive. After everyone leaves the room, Fry finds some drilling samples dated 22 years ago. According to the samples, Fry discovers more information and goes to a room where she discovers a planetarium. Using the planetarium, she learns that there was an eclipse before, indicating that the ancient inhabitants were hunted and slaughtered by the predatory creatures during the eclipse. Unexpectedly, she finds out that the next eclipse is approaching the planet very soon, so she warns the survivors to work on the ship as quickly as possible. However, Johns tells her not to panic as they are still looking for more power cells and points out that Riddick might hijack the ship when it's ready for launch. He reveals to Fry that Riddick once hijacked a ship and killed the pilot to launch it. The next day, Fry continues to repair the ship when suddenly she sees Riddick entering, so she asks if what Johns told him is true. Surprised, he admits it, but also reveals that Johns is just a mercenary, not a law officer. He also says that Johns had the drugs that could save Owens but never thought to give one. As furious as she is to hear this, there are more urgent things to do, so she doesn't have time to interrogate Johns. After this conversation with Riddick, Fry goes outside. When she and the survivors realize that the eclipse in that system is rapidly approaching, Shotza suggests they should grab everything they need from the crashed ship before the eclipse finally occurs. She quickly starts the solar-powered truck, along with the survivors. When they arrive at the crash site, they quickly rescue all the power cells, while Pyrrhus separates to grab his things. As they gather, they notice that the planet is starting to be covered in darkness, meaning the eclipse has finally begun. In this case, the solar-powered truck can no longer be operated, which leaves the survivors trapped in the crashed ship. As the darkness envelopes the place, the predatory creatures emerge from the ground to attack the survivors. They quickly flee seeking shelter in the fallen ship. When everyone is about to enter, Shotza fails to survive due to the attack from the predatory creatures. After watching Shotza die, Pyrrhus orders the other members to enter, but Fry and Riddick remain outside. Riddick removes his glasses and watches as the predatory creatures emerge by the thousands from the ground. Once inside, the creatures attempt to invade the hull and attack them again, so Riddick makes a hole to lead them to the other side where they can hide and plan how to return to the geological research settlement. While walking through the darkness, a young pilgrim is in danger, and Riddick tries to save him using his keen eyesight, but the young pilgrim does not hear him and runs away, leading to his death. Back at the hideout, Fry still maintains the plan of bringing the 4 power cells back to the ship. Johns disagrees with Fry's idea and tries to hurt her, but Riddick immediately threatens him with a sharp shard. Because of this, Johns returns to his place, and Fry continues discussing the plans, where she suggests that Riddick could lead them to the ship using his keen eyesight. Soon, Riddick becomes the group's leader, watching with his sharp eyes for any creatures nearby in the darkness and safely leading them to the crashed ship. They quickly salvage their parts, activate their power, and build a defensive platform with their UV light poles. Then, Riddick takes the group back to the ship and uses his keen eyesight to protect them. However, young Pilgrim Jack suddenly grabs the part of the power cell that fell from the cart. Fry tries to stop her, but she has already separated from the group, almost causing her death at the hands of the predatory creature. Meanwhile, a frightened Pyrus crawls on the ground and accidentally destroys the defensive platform. As a result, the predatory creatures have already surrounded him and devour him. Now that the light poles are destroyed, the group activates their flares and uses them as a last resort. Riddick tells the group that they cannot cross the ravine, as young Jack is bleeding, as it could attract predators, but when the group continues walking, John suddenly suggests to Riddick to use Jack as bait while he keeps the others away. Irritated, Riddick challenges him to a fight, while Fry orders the rest of the group to move. Riddick slashes John's back with his sharp shard, distracting the predators drawn by the smell of blood. The beasts attack Johns and kill him. Riddick then rejoins the others in the group, and together they enter the ravine. However, they spot several predatory creatures surrounding them from above, so Riddick orders them to run faster while he pulls the power cells as he runs. As they traverse the ravine, rain begins to fall, extinguishing their makeshift torches. At that moment, Iman's last young pilgrim is taken by a creature. Because of this, Riddick hides the remaining group members in a cave to keep them safe while he, on the other hand, continues traversing the ravine with the power cells. Later, Riddick safely arrives at the geological research settlement and begins to power the ship. Meanwhile, the remaining group discovers bioluminescent worms inside the cave, causing them to use them as light and put everyone in a bottle. Then, Fry volunteers to go out and check on Riddick and the ship. She quickly reaches the facility and discovers that Riddick is about to launch the ship without them, so Fry blocks the way to prevent Riddick from starting the engine and pleads with him to rescue Iman and Jack in the cave. However, Riddick refuses and somehow offers a deal, saying that she should go with him and leave the two behind. This offer initially shakes her determination to save the other members, but Fry remembers how Owen prevented her from purging the passenger section before they fell on the planet, and she still feels guilty about it. So, she cries in frustration and says she must go back for them, even if it could cost her life. Because of this, Riddick is finally persuaded and returns to the cave with Fry. With Riddick's keen eyesight and bioluminescent lights, they safely return to the ship. Unfortunately, Riddick separates from the group and is attacked by some creatures, being wounded in the right leg, which prevents him from walking properly. Meanwhile, Fry returns to him after hearing his screams, but unfortunately, she is pierced from behind and dragged by one of the predatory beasts, leaving Riddick unable to do anything for her. Riddick then returns to the ship and begins to engage the engines, but stops when he notices something. He turns off the engine and waits for the predatory creatures to surround them. When the beasts gather, Riddick activates the engine and incinerates them, killing them instantly. Finally, the surviving group escapes the barren planet, but before returning to Earth, Jack asks Riddick what they will say about him when questioned by authorities. The film ends with Riddick telling Jack and Iman that they should tell the authorities that the criminal Riddick is definitely dead.